So, hi Adrian. Before we start, I want to introduce myself. My name is Avi Itzkovic. I'm the founder of UX Salon, which is a group dedicated to advance the profession of user experience design. And we're here on UX on Coffee because, first of all, I'll explain what UX on Coffee is. UX on Coffee is we both have cups of coffees. Can you show your cup? What is that? That's just a broken handle.
Yeah, it's a broken hand that fell down. Yes.
Okay. So we both have coffees here, and basically what it means is we're going to have a casual conversation over coffee, and we're not limited by time, but how much coffee we have in our cups. So as soon as the coffee is over, I'm going to say to you goodbye.
Okay, can I just make an open confession at this point?
Yes.
I'm actually drinking tea right now, but I already had 5 cappuccinos in the morning to make up for it because I'm in the Swiss Alps and I don't have my coffee maker with me. So I
Okay.
apologize for that.
So I want to introduce you, Adrian Zumbrunnen, right? Zumbrunnen
Yes, exactly.
is a user experience designer currently working at Google, and Adrian is also coming to the next UX Salon, which will happen in April. And I'm really excited to have you here, Adrian, coming here to Tel Aviv. This is the second time coming because your first talk was such a big hit. People really loved it. And I had to bring you back because you're working on some interesting stuff. We'll talk about it in a minute. But if you may, can you show us the view? Adrian is
Of
currently in the
course.
Swiss Alps, as he said. And,
Let me
and
show you.
yes. Oh my
So,
goodness.
hello, everyone.
That's great. Where is that exactly?
So it's in Flims. It's in the Swiss Alps. It's about 1.5 hours from Zurich by car.
Great. Great view.
So it's a
So,
beautiful place.
so thank you, Adrian, for sitting with me on coffee here or on tea. And can you tell me a little bit more, like what's going on with you today? Like, what are you doing today?
So right now, I recently started working, like contracting for Google. I just switched teams. Last year I was in the shopping team, and now I'm working on maps, which is really interesting. And right now also I'm like writing articles. So there's an article that I had on my mind for quite a long time, which is about making decisions. Because making decisions is like, how can you design an interface basically that helps people to make better decisions? Because like the very act of decision making was always something that I've struggled with a lot myself. And it also was always something that kept me occupied. So that's kind of what I'm currently doing, and
This
also
is
like other jobs.
this is interesting because you were talking to me about it earlier. The decision making or can you elaborate on what this? Because it's really interesting for me. We were thinking about bringing that talk. Perhaps that talk would come to the conference, or another one that we will talk about in a second. But can you give me more insights on what you're thinking about decision in user experience design?
Yeah, so when it comes to making decisions, we mostly think that decision making is a rational process, a process where we consciously evaluate different options and then try to make the best choice out of them. But it turns out that decision making isn't as rational as we think, and we can influence decision making with subtle cues in design. So, for instance, when it comes, so I love yogurt, and this is a coffee yogurt, by the way. So, for the sake of this talk, and when it comes to yogurt, it turns out there are two ways that you can sell a yogurt. Let's say one yogurt is 95% fat free, and the other yogurt has 5% fat. It's basically the same yogurt, both have 5% fat, but one puts its focus on the 5% fat, while the other one puts its focus on the 95% fat free. And this small difference in the way that you phrase a product, in the way you phrase a choice, can make a significant difference in how people choose. And whereas it seems obvious that this shouldn't make a difference, it actually does on a very deep level. And this is something that I find very interesting, that things that go unnoticed by our conscious mind can influence the way we make decisions in real life. And I think it has a profound impact on the way we design user interfaces.
Okay, so is it about psychology?
It's about psychology. It's about how to use psychology in design to change the way people should interact with your design, basically.
You were talking to me about placebo choices. What is that?
So placebo choices is an example of, so in my article about the illusion of time, which might also talk about, I talked about how placebo buttons can make people feel better about waiting. So for instance, if you go to New York, 90% of all the buttons that are in New York basically don't work.
The buttons for the traffics, you mean?
Exactly. The buttons for the traffic lights, exactly. Good point. The buttons for the traffic lights, most of them don't work. Just like in elevators, most buttons actually don't work, when like the close and opening doors button, right? So, but what happens is that while people, through the engagement, by engaging people in the process, it actually feels like the wait is shorter than it really is. And placebo choices is a similar thing. It means that you can add a choice, that you can add an additional options to a decision, and this will influence the way people make decisions. So, yeah, it's a little hard to explain, but in a practical example, it basically means that by introducing, for instance, like a very high-priced product to your shop, which will be placed next to the cheaper product, it will make the cheaper product look much more attractive than it actually is. And these are very subtle cues that can impact the way people decide.
Very interesting. So I'm going to look forward to read that article. But let's discuss the article that kind of made waves. I hear you wrote about the illusion of time, and how time perception affects user experience. Share with me some insights, because we're going to bring. I think we're going to bring you for this talk to the conference. Share some insights on just a high level of what is this about. What's the illusion of time? How can user experience designers think about time when they're thinking about experience? All right, technical difficulties, people. We had to stop for a few minutes, but now we're back. And Adrian, we were talking about animation and I'm sorry, we're talking about time in user experience. Tell me a little bit more about the article you wrote.
So yeah, the article was basically about how time perception changes the way we feel about user interfaces. Like, for instance, the thing that happened just now, we had a 3 minutes breakdown, but it felt like an hour because it was so painful, right? And so, and one of the examples that I'm talking about in the article is basically that animation plays a critical role when it comes to improving the perceived waiting time. Because, like, when you think about it, animation itself takes some time. It guides a user through the experience, while at the same time it gives you a little extra time to load things from the server. So in case if you're like programming a chat application or things that needs a lot of going back and forth between the app and the client, between the server and the client, it gives you a much more fluid experience. And another example is also one of the other concepts I'm talking about in the article is the concept of no blocking user interfaces that basically lets you go on. For instance, on Twitter is a good example of this. When you write personal messages on Twitter, private messages, or you send out a tweet, basically it always makes an optimistic assumption. It always pretends that it works. And only if network connectivity is extremely bad, or if the sending of the message actually fails, it will tell you that something happens. So even though that's not technically faster, it gives the user the impression that the experience is more fluid, and it helps to keep the user in a flow, which is what I think one of the most delightful things to do, like creating that flow experience so that people don't notice your user interface, so that it becomes kind of invisible.
So time, the article and the presentation you may give in the conference is about you have a framework on how to regard time, right? You have like 9 steps or 7 things that you examine, and you give this overview of how we can look and on time as an element of design.
Yes, exactly.
Is there any scenarios where actually, because often we want to make the experience faster, have people go in the flow of things. Is there times where you want to slow down the experience?
Yeah, it's a very interesting point. There are definitely moments where you want to slow down users, and that's especially when it comes to deliberate thinking. So when you want people to think, you actually have to take them out of the flow, which is ironic because we love this idea of creating user interfaces that basically guide the users through the experience, where friction is seen as the ultimate arch enemy of our craft. Whereas I see friction as something that's potentially useful to change the way people think. I don't know if you have heard of Daniel Kahneman's work on the two ways we think. There's the fast way of thinking, and there's the more deliberate, analytical way of approaching a problem. And by slowing down users is an incredibly powerful tool to make people think, to make sure that people don't do a mistake. So when you consider a banking interface, for instance, like e-banking software or software where it's important that users don't make a decision, there is actually a really nice tool to use design techniques that do not conform to an industry standard, to an industry pattern, because it forces people to think how this interface works. It challenges them to a certain degree to find out how it works. Right?
Very cool. Well, more about that in the conference that will be in April 3rd and 4th, this coming in a couple of months, actually. So the reason actually we met in Berlin when I saw you present on the animation, and then I invited you to come to Tel Aviv because I really loved your stuff, and I'm really happy that we're still keeping in touch. Is there anything new in the world of animation? What's new in the last year that's developed in terms of using animation as an element for as a tool for creating experiences, or what's new there?
So I think what has changed about animation a lot in the recent years is that people now see animations as a critical ingredient of good interaction design. Whereas in 2013, when I wrote my initial article about animation, people were still thinking of animation as something that's just delightful, something as a nice add-on. And also I think that with the recent trend of flat design, with the recent trend of pattern labs, like basically the whole, you could say as a UX designer, basically what you do today is you have like a tool set of patterns, you have a tool set of design principles, and you throw them together, and it's like cooking, right? And then you hope that it makes sense somehow. But this process, this very act of streamlining the whole process that used to be so creative, also creates websites and digital experiences that look awfully similar. So, and that's where I think animations are coming in, and they have an important role there because they fill in the gaps. They have a very, very important impact in the way brands communicate today, because animations can make the critical difference in how an interface feels. So we have the way an interface looks, and we have the way an interface feels, and those are two very different concepts. And I think so in terms of branding, in terms of setting yourself apart from your competitors, it's a really inalienable asset. It's very important, I think.
Okay. Very cool. Maybe perhaps you should write the second article, continuing on animation, perhaps if there is a room for that, because I know it's great. The talk that actually people can see, the talk from last year, it's available on YouTube, is very popular, and people really like to hear more, sure, about what's new and what's developed. By the way, there are new tools to present animation right now. Is there anything?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, so that's great you're bringing this up. I'm very excited about Adobe Comet, which will come out later this year, I think. So first, users are already have private betas, I think, betas. So the great thing about Adobe Comet is that it combines interactivity with design, right? So basically, it's like Sketch on steroids. On the other hand, I'm not saying that Sketch is in a bad position because there's already a plugin that will do similar things. I think it's called Silverlight, or I don't remember, but we can post it in the comments later. I'm sure we'll find it. But in general, like their tools are getting much more powerful. So I still remember I used to prototype animations in Adobe After Effects, which is a very painful interface. And now there are so many new tools hitting the market. It's like there's a very strong demand, and there's also Principle from the guys from Facebook. It's also a tool to create your animations. It has even like keyframe style animations in it, like professional editing software has. But it's much easier to use. So if you're coming from designing in Sketch, you will find yourself there much quicker than, let's say, After Effects, for instance. So lots of new tools hitting the market. I'm very excited to see where this is going.
Well, okay, we have a very few. I'm running out of coffee, which means we
Me
have
too.
just one last question, perhaps I want to ask you. It
Yeah.
seems like you're really like you love the craft of design. It seems like you always keep learning and keep educating and keep the articles you write. I think it's for the soul, right? It's not you just do that because you want to learn more. What drives you? Why is that? What can you give, like how can you give inspiration for people that in that regard? Because it seems like you do more than you do more than your share for just working in in Google and doing
Yeah,
stuff.
it's like really, it's a craft I really love, and so if you're like working with materials, let's say you're a carpenter or you work with actual materials, not like we do, then I think it makes a critical difference if people have a good understanding, a solid understanding of how something works, what's the material like that we're using to build this. And I think that's what I'm really passionate about. For me, it's really about understanding why things work and why others don't. And this is actually something that I think is really hard. And that's where user testing is really is so valuable, because I always catch myself having these assumptions. That's probably going to be easy, and then you suddenly realize that users struggle a lot with that very interface that you thought is so easy. And basically, what I'm trying to do is I read a lot. I read lots of news articles, just like I think understanding the zeitgeist, like that's a German word for like what's happening right now, is really important to get a feeling of your users. But I'm getting very philosophical here. So
It's all right. It's good. That's what I want to learn. Because I mean, you really go deep into like studying a certain topic. I mean, it seems like you're very curious on many aspects of things. Why is that? What is that? What drives you to kind of push forward? I don't know if there's an answer to that, but
yeah, it's just I think there is a certain level of satisfaction, certain level of happiness that you get from creating something that people like. So it started when I was when I was 19 years old. I created my first content management system, which was based on a contextual menu. So the whole thing was basically just driven by the context menu, and people loved it. So the very few people that I actually showed, the few people that actually used it, they loved it. And that was the first time, I think, where I actually fell in love with this craft of creating something that people like. And when you see that people suddenly create things, when they suddenly achieve their goals with the very things you put in this world, this is something that's very honorable. It's something that's very delightful, right?
Well, I would say that you are an inspiration to me because I see how much hard work you put into the research of the things you put out to the world, and like showing people what you've learned is very important as well. So I want to thank you again for taking the time to have coffee with me.
Thank you so much for having me.
Have coffee and tea, and I will see you soon. At
I'll
UX
see you
Salon.
soon. Yes.
Bye for now.
Bye. Thanks so much. See you.
Bye.